Hey there, viewers. There's a moment in every courtroom when the noise dies down and all that's left is what can't be unsaid. Today, that moment belonged to Diddy. After the judge revealed what no one saw coming, he broke down in front of everyone. And what triggered it? Left the whole room silent. Let's get into it. Chapter 1. The hallway outside courtroom 9C. I was only supposed to be covering for Torres one day. That was the plan. Torres had a funeral to attend, his sister's husband or something, and they needed someone from the backup list to sub in. That morning, dispatch called me at 5, said the post was federal, high profile, nothing out of the ordinary, just keep to the wall and follow orders. You're not there to think, they said, you're there to stand. So I stood. Courtroom 9C had a different kind of quiet. Not the kind you get in the early hours or when folks are just minding their business. This was the kind of quiet where even doors closed slower, like they didn't want to disturb the air. The walls in this hallway were off-white, but they looked gray under the humming lights. The floor, polished, reflected our boots in a way that made it feel like we were hovering over something we didn't understand. They told me right away, don't talk. Don't stare, and whatever you do, don't make eye contact with the defendant. I laughed under my breath when they said it, thinking it was just one of those exaggerated protocols they give rookies. But the way the lead officer, Sergeant Monroe, looked at me when he said it made me stop smiling real quick. He leaned in and said, "I'm not joking. If he locks eyes with you, just look away, fast. You'll know why when it happens." At 8:40 a.m., the hallway outside 9C started to change. First, it was the press. I counted 6 tripods, maybe 15 people total. Reporters, techs, and a few photographers, all whispering like they were in church. They weren't even supposed to be inside, just outside the glass, but you could feel them staring in, like kids outside a candy shop that got boarded up before they could spend their allowance. Then the staff started moving. Not just the usual clerks and runners. These were higher-ups. Federal marshals in black suits. 2 DOJ folks whose faces I recognized from televised hearings. All silent. All stiff. Something was happening today. Something big. Around 8:53, that's when the box came in. I'll never forget it. A single man wheeled it in. No badge, no nameplate. He wore a plain black uniform with nothing on it. No patch, not even a barcode. Just black cargo pants and a thermal shirt. He pushed a hand cart with a cardboard box maybe 4 feet wide, 2.5 tall, taped all the way around in red. Across the front, in bold stencil lettering, it read, "Confidential evidence, safe until statement of grunt." Monroe stepped in front of the guy, hand up. "Who are you delivering to?" The man didn't answer. He reached into his back pocket, handed over a folded paper with 3 signatures at the bottom. Monroe read it, nodded once, and stepped aside. No words exchanged. I leaned forward, not to be nosy, just curious. I couldn't see anything inside the box, no labels beyond the stencil. Just thick tape and the groan of the handcart as it rolled over the uneven tile. I don't know why, but I remember thinking, that box is heavier than it looks. The man pushed it through the courtroom doors and disappeared. He didn't come back out. I never saw him again. About 10 minutes later, everything went still. A few staffers near the side door started whispering. Not loud enough to make out, but close enough that I could catch fragments. "They're gonna say it today. He has no idea what's in that box. She's reading it herself." At 9:05, the elevator dinged, and that's when he arrived. They brought him in through the service corridor, guarded by 2 federal marshals and another correctional officer from MDC. I'd seen photos of him, obviously, music videos, old interviews, perfume ads with that slow-motion swagger. The kind of face you couldn't miss if you grew up in the early 2000s. But the man I saw, that wasn't the same person. He looked smaller somehow, His shoulders hunched, not from cold, but like the air itself was pressing down on him. He had on a loose gray sweatsuit with the MDC stamp faint along the side seam. His hair was grayer than I expected, not salt and pepper stylish, but like silvered steel, dry, uneven, and grown out without shape. His beard patchy, his skin pale, almost yellow under the courthouse lights. But what really threw me was the sweat. It was cold that morning. The hallways always got a chill to it, but he had sweat beading down his forehead, rolling into his eyes, and he didn't wipe it away. It just stayed there, dripping, like he didn't even notice. They walked him slow. The marshals weren't rough with him. Didn't need to be. He moved like a man heading into something he'd already lost. No fight, just silence. He didn't even look at me, just stared straight ahead, blinking too often, lips parted. I thought about Monroe's warning, about what would happen if he looked at me. And I was grateful he didn't. As he passed the courtroom door, he paused, only for a second. His head turned slightly toward the jury box, not the judge's bench. And then something weird happened. He froze. Not like a full stop, more like a hesitation, like he saw something, or someone. His eyes locked onto that corner of the room, the part I couldn't see from my angle. He tilted his head, the way people do when they're trying to remember a song they haven't heard in years. I tried to follow his gaze. All I saw was an empty row of benches. A shadow, maybe, nothing unusual. But his face changed, like he'd gone somewhere else. His jaw moved a little. No sound, just lips moving. One of the marshals nudged him. "Let's go." He nodded once and moved on. I stared after him, not really sure why I felt cold all of a sudden. That's when one of the defense team brushed past me, a woman in her 30s maybe, sharp suit, carrying a black binder and a phone with no case. She didn't stop, but she glanced at me and said, almost too quiet to hear, "This isn't about bail anymore, not really." And just like that, she was gone. Inside, the courtroom doors shut. The latch echoed down the hallway. I stayed there like I was told, wall duty, silent, staring at the floor. But my thoughts were loud. What was in the box? Why did the judge want it today? Why was he sweating like that? Why the ghost in the jury box reaction? Why the whisper? And if it wasn't about bail, what the hell was it about? Chapter 2. The file nobody was supposed to mention. I've worked in records and document control for almost 9 years, and I can tell you with a straight face, some files were never meant to be opened again. Not because they're dangerous in some thriller movie kind of way, but because they carry something heavier than evidence. They carry echoes. Stuff that clings to you after you've closed the folder and logged it into storage. My name's Regina. Most people in this courthouse don't know it. They just know me as the clerk in sublevel records. I like it that way. I work behind the doors most don't think to open, in a climate-controlled room full of silence and slow fluorescent lights that never flicker. It's peaceful, really. You don't get involved, you just handle the paper trail. But that morning, everything felt off, before I even took my coat off. There was a note taped to my office door. Regina K. 5238. Allocate full file plus prior dismissed. Final decision judge request. Priority level 3. Under that, someone had hand-scrawled in pen. Delivered directly to courtroom. Do not review contents unless necessary for indexing. The handwriting was unusual, blocky, unsure, and there was no name, no initials. That never happens. Judges, clerks, attorneys, everybody leaves some kind of trace. But this, it was like someone wrote it fast and left before thinking twice. Case 523. T had come up a few times over the last year, in passing. I knew what it was connected to. Everyone did. We all heard the rumors when the sealed indictments started stacking, when the denials hit the system, one after the other. But my job wasn't about the noise. It was about following the paper. I went down to Archive 4B and keyed in the retrieval code. That section had been shut since late last year. Once cases get dismissed, they get buried in the physical archives, encoded and locked behind a digital tag that keeps anyone from accessing them unless a judge overrides it. When the drawer slid open, I saw the folder right away. Thick, bulging, yellowed around the edges like it had been printed with heat. It wasn't just one document, it was a pile. Someone had jammed extra pages in there at the last second. I lifted it carefully. The label had peeled halfway off. Beneath the original case number was a second tag, handwritten in marker. Mirror notes. That made me pause. There was no indexing requirement for anything called mirror notes, and there was no instruction in our system to include that version in any retrieval. Still, I followed the order. Sealed file, level 3 priority. I placed the folder into a lockbox and walked it through 2 security checkpoints to get to the hallway outside courtroom 9C. Nobody spoke to me on the way there, which was odd. People always say hi to me, always ask about my lunch, or my son, or how the printer's holding up in Archive 4B. But not today. They looked right through me, like I was just carrying a ghost in a briefcase. Inside the courtroom, the judge hadn't come in yet, but her clerk, Benjamin, met me at the side. He was pale, more than usual, hands jittery. He held the box like it weighed twice what it did. "You read it?" he asked, not quite whispering but low enough. "No," I said, and meant it. He nodded like he was relieved or disappointed, maybe both. Then he opened the box, slid out the folder, and handed it to the judge's assistant. That's when I saw the stamp across the top page, in bright red ink, all caps. "He must hear it read aloud." I blinked at it. No file I'd ever handled had a directive like that. Not may be read, not can be read, but must. I tried not to stare. I didn't want to read further than I was supposed to. But I couldn't stop seeing the words. He must hear it read aloud. I stepped back and took my usual position near the back, just where we're supposed to stand when waiting to be dismissed. As the benches filled, I watched people come in who weren't on the usual guest list. Senior DOJ people, a retired judge, even a former prosecutor I hadn't seen since the Epstein fallout. They all sat still. No one whispered. The room had the feel of a funeral, but no one knew who the body was. I started to wonder about the mirror notes. I wasn't supposed to look, but I couldn't help remembering that the original 523T file had been dismissed because of a technicality. That's the part the media glosses over. When they say a charge was dismissed, they never say why. They never mention that sometimes it's not because the evidence wasn't there, but because the plaintiff didn't refile on time, or couldn't, or was threatened into silence. That's what happened with 523T. I remember seeing the intake form months ago, the way the plaintiff had only listed herself as Jane. No last name, no address. The case was tossed in under a pile of others, then marked sealed when it didn't meet re-identification standards. I didn't forget it, because the allegations were vivid. But in the mirror notes, someone had collected references to at least 3 prior dismissals that matched the same pattern. Same events, different cities, different timelines, but mirrored down to exact phrases. One accuser said she was told to just breathe the smoke and dance. Another, in a different filing, said, "They told me to breathe the smoke and stop thinking." Those things stay with you. The judge entered at exactly 9:15, not a minute late. She didn't say good morning, just nodded at Benjamin, who placed the file in front of her. She touched it like it might cut her. Just 2 fingers. Then she glanced at the clock. "Regina," I thought, "you should leave now." But I couldn't. Something kept me frozen. I looked around and noticed something strange. No press. Usually we get at least a few legal media people granted in on overflow, but today The press had been denied. The hallway outside was full of them, but in here, it was just key staff, security, and a few people whose names I'd only seen on memos marked classified. That's when I realized, whatever was in that folder, it wasn't supposed to be argued. It was supposed to be heard. The judge cleared her throat and opened the file. The sound of paper being flipped echoed through the chamber. My stomach tightened, not out of fear, out of knowing that this exact moment was one of those turning points, a small action that would lead to something irreversible. You feel it in the pit of your stomach, the way a train feels vibration before it hears the horn. I took one step back. No one noticed. The defense team sat like statues. The prosecution leaned forward just slightly. I turned to leave quietly, but as I did, I heard a whisper pass behind me. A man in a gray suit, someone I didn't recognize, leaned toward a woman seated 2 rows ahead and said, "Cried the first time he read it alone. Let's see what happens now." I remember how I walked out of the room, but I remember the voice. I remember the way he said cried, like it was a confession. Chapter 3. No bail, no leverage, no time. Some people think the bail hearing is the boring part, the formality before the fireworks, but they don't understand the weight of what happens in those minutes. They don't understand what it means when a judge tells you to your face that you're not trusted with air and sky. My name's Leonard. I've been a federal pretrial officer for almost 2 decades. I've sat through hearings for mobsters, CEOs, cartel lieutenants, even one ex-governor. I've heard every plea and promise, every lie wrapped in velvet, every desperate negotiation over how many walls a man needs around him to make the world believe he's safe to walk free. But I've never seen anything like this. Today was different before I even stepped in the building. There was no chatter in the lobby. The marshals had posted 2 extra guards on every courtroom wing. No one said why. The elevators moved slower too. Someone had toggled the override, making them stop at every floor. A stall tactic, a way to control who arrived, when. By the time I made it up to courtroom 9C, I already knew this hearing wasn't about bail anymore. Not really. But it was still called a bail hearing, still filed under a number with release attached to it. Combs, Diddy, Puff, whatever name you prefer, had already submitted everything you could think of to try and walk free. 3 proposals in total. The first was house arrest in the Hamptons with a private security firm fronting 24-hour surveillance. Denied. The second was a monitored facility in Atlanta, one of his old compounds retrofitted with biometric gates and heat sensors. Denied. The third, international diplomatic assistance from a small Caribbean nation, promising full compliance with U.S. monitoring guidelines. That one barely made it to the judge's desk before getting shut down. Each time, the justification was the same: a credible pattern of manipulation, threat, and flight risk. And each time, Combs showed less fight. I remember the first hearing how he tried to smile, like the cameras weren't rolling but the performance still mattered. He had leaned over to his legal team whispering suggestions like he still had a say, like he thought charm would carry him through. But this morning, there was no charm, only sweat, silence, and the sound of him breathing too fast through his nose. He walked in wearing the same gray MDC-issued sweatsuit, hands cuffed low at the waist, flanked by 2 marshals who didn't need to say anything. Their eyes said enough. He sat without being told. I was a few rows behind the defense bench, close enough to read the tension in the backs of necks and jawlines. His posture was the worst I'd ever seen it, shoulders curled inward like his body was trying to become smaller, like he was trying to disappear. He turned to the man beside him, a defense liaison maybe, and leaned in. Whispered something. The man didn't nod, didn't blink, just looked straight ahead, stone cold. No reply. The clerk announced the judge. Everyone stood. The judge, same one from the prior hearings, walked in with slower steps than usual. She didn't look at Combs. She didn't look at anyone. She went straight to her bench, sat, and rested both hands on the folder in front of her. Not the usual stack of bail paperwork. This one was thick, manila, with worn corners and 3 large paper clips clamping sections of it shut. She looked at it like it might burn her fingers. "Seal the room," she said. That wasn't standard protocol. Usually we limit doors, instruct latecomers to wait outside. But this was different. The marshal locked the courtroom doors. From inside, the sound of the lock echoed. That's when I felt my heart rate pick up. You get used to tension in this line of work, but this wasn't courtroom tension. This was containment. Whatever was about to happen, it had to be contained. I adjusted my tie with sweaty fingers and sat back down. The judge looked out at the room, not scanning faces, but letting her gaze settle into the crowd like a fog, slow, deliberate. Her voice was flat when she spoke. This hearing was originally scheduled to address a final review of Mr. Combs' eligibility for conditional release, she said. However, in light of newly presented documents, this court will now consider additional context necessary to finalize its ruling. Combs didn't move, not a twitch. "This context," she said, lifting the folder, "has been entered under sealed affidavit, corroborated by confidential testimony and cross-referenced against prior civil documentation, some of which was dismissed due to procedural insufficiencies." Her eyes moved to him for the first time, direct, steady. But the record remains. That's when the room changed. You don't always notice the shift in air when something heavy is about to land, but this time we all felt it. It was like someone had turned off the vent system, like gravity suddenly got meaner. She opened the file. Combs blinked. Once, twice, then again. Rapid fire, like a man trying to forget what was coming. I leaned forward just slightly. I saw it happen. His jaw tightened so hard I could see the muscle pulse beneath his skin. Then the lips pressed together, but not closed, not calmly, clenched, like he was biting down. The judge began to read. Not fast, not performative, just steady. The affidavit started with a line I'll never forget. "In the basement of the property there was a room we weren't allowed to photograph." I didn't hear the rest right away because I was too focused on Combs. He was still biting down. His mouth had started to tremble at the edges. His chin twitched. His whole body remained still, but his eyes had lost focus, staring at nothing. Then, slowly, a thin line of red welled at the corner of his mouth. I thought maybe it was a scratch, maybe the air had been dry, his lips cracked, but then I realized it was coming from inside. He was clenching so hard he'd started to bleed. Right then, I understood. This wasn't a bail hearing. This was a reckoning, and there was nowhere left to run. Chapter 4. The affidavit no one prepared for. The courtroom was never meant to hold this much silence. It stretched across the benches, hovered beneath the fluorescent lights, seeped into the grain of the judge's bench, and pressed against the walls like a second layer of paint. No one moved. Not even the clock ticked loud enough to be noticed anymore. The judge sat with the file open in front of her, 2 pages already turned. A third held delicately between her fingers like it was made of something living. Her lips moved slowly as she read. Not for the public, not even for the court record, but because the words she was about to say required a kind of care that went beyond legal obligation. "This is a sworn affidavit," she began, "received under protective order and previously filed within a now dismissed civil suit identified as Docket 2147A. She didn't name the person who wrote it. The name had been blacked out, redacted with a strip so thick it bled through the paper. It was handwritten, she explained. Every line penned in neat, almost mechanical cursive on yellow legal paper. No signature, no date, just the phrase written in block letters at the top. What I saw, what I knew, what I carried. She took a breath, then read the first paragraph. I worked at the house for 7 years, long enough to know which lights had to stay off, which doors never opened from the inside. I was given a rule book, 15 pages laminated. Rule number 1 was to never take photos of the staff, of the guests, or of anything that happened after 2 a.m. A murmur fluttered through the courtroom like a paper blown by wind. The judge continued. There were underground rooms, not basements, not wine cellars, rooms with black walls and no switches inside, only from the hallway. I saw women go in, I saw some come out with blankets over their heads. I was told not to ask. Someone in the third row coughed and didn't stop. They had to be let out, hand over their mouth, trying not to retch. There were substances on the trays, not drinks, not drugs I could name. Mists, oils, powders in little bags the size of sugar packets. One of the security guys once called it mood control, said it made people easier to entertain. The judge paused. Her hand trembled slightly as she flipped to the next page. The room didn't breathe. There was a roster. I saw it once by mistake. A printed spreadsheet with nicknames, ages, a ranking system I didn't understand. I only remember one column title clearly. It said, "Can be trusted to forget." Near the jury box, a woman wiped her eyes. A man 2 seats down folded his hands so tightly they turned white. One of the court staff behind the bar shifted uncomfortably and glanced toward the locked doors, like he wanted to leave but knew he couldn't. The judge's voice softened. We weren't allowed to make eye contact after midnight. Guests could do anything, staff couldn't speak. I kept a log, but only in my head. I still remember the nights when the screams came from under the floor. I still remember how the walls shook when the music stopped. She paused, a longer breath this time. She pressed 2 fingers to her temple, the way someone does when a migraine starts to bloom. Diddy hadn't moved in several minutes. He leaned back, head resting against the chair. Eyes pointed straight up to the ceiling like he was trying to memorize each light fixture. His lips were parted just slightly, breathing shallow, as if he needed to keep reminding his body to stay conscious. Once, I found a girl curled up in the pantry. She was barefoot, her makeup smeared like a raccoon's mask. She looked straight through me. I asked if she needed help. She said, "I already signed it. I'm not real anymore." A loud exhale cut through the air. Someone, no one could tell who, stood and walked out. No protest, no commotion, just the sound of footsteps across tile and the door creaking once before closing again. The judge paused again. When she spoke next, her voice cracked. I reported it once. A friend of mine was a lawyer. He told me to stay quiet, said if I made it official, they'd find a way to paint me as part of it. That's when I started writing this. Every night, on legal pads I hid behind the insulation in the wall. I wrote it so I wouldn't forget, so someone, someday would read it and know. She set the paper down, visibly swallowing hard. There was no reaction from the defense table, no objection, no attempt to interrupt, only a stillness that felt more like surrender than strategy. Combs shifted in his seat finally. One slow turn of the head toward the judge. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. Just lips, forming the shape of a question no one else could hear. She looked down at the remaining pages. Didn't touch them. Instead, she said something that turned every head in the room. This will not affect your bail. That decision has already been made. He blinked. Shook his head once, then again, like a child waking from a nightmare who can't make sense of where they are. His hands clenched, shoulders stiff. He mouthed something again, this time sharper, more frantic. He thought this was about bail. He thought this was still a game with a clock and a scoreboard. But the judge had made it clear. This wasn't about jail anymore. This was about everything that had been hidden. Chapter 5. The Breakdown. It's not about likeness. That's what I always remind myself when I sit down to draw. It's not about cheekbones, or hairlines, or even the way someone tilts their chin when they're pretending not to be afraid. It's about the story behind the stillness, the twitch in a jaw, the tremble in a hand that doesn't know if it's about to rise in defense or surrender. My name's Hallie. I sketch for federal court records, not for the news, not for the headlines, just for the archive. I don't get paid extra if the trial goes viral or if the defendant is famous. I just show up, draw what's there, and try not to let what I see stick to me on the ride home. But this one's already under my skin. When I walked into courtroom 9C, I didn't bring my usual pens. Something told me they wouldn't be enough. I brought charcoal, softer graphite, and a kneaded eraser I hadn't used in years. The kind I take out when I expect tears, distortion, faces you can't quite pin down without shading through 6 layers. The courtroom was quiet again. Not the hush of protocol, but that eerie, brittle kind of silence that happens after a storm, when the damage is still sinking in. He was already seated. Diddy, Combs, Sean, whatever name fits now. He sat with his head low, like the muscles in his neck had stopped trying to keep him upright. His left hand rested on the table, fingers curled in slightly, as if he'd just released something or someone and forgotten to uncurl them. His right hand sat limp in his lap. From my angle, it looked like it didn't belong to him, like it had given up waiting for instructions and decided to rest on its own. I opened my sketch pad and began the first layer. I started with the shoulders. That's always where emotion hides in men who don't want to show their face. You can tell everything from the slope, and his were sinking, collapsing inward like a house with rot in the beams. The judge wasn't speaking yet. She sat with her hands folded atop the now closed file, watching him, not coldly, not even harshly, just still, like she knew he was unspooling without her needing to say a word. And then it happened. He spoke. Not a yell, not a demand, just a sound. A crackling whisper that tried to stretch into a sentence but didn't make it past the first word. His lips parted. He shifted in his chair, half turning toward his counsel, though they didn't look back. His throat caught. He tried again, this time louder. I did. The judge lifted one hand, not to silence him, but to acknowledge that she had heard. That was enough. You may remain seated for the reading, she said. But he didn't sit still. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, and pressed his palms into his face, hard, like he was trying to push something back in. Tears, screams, history. From my seat, I captured the arc of his back, the way it hunched like a closing door. I shaded in the space between his spine and the chair, because that gap told me more than any facial expression could. It was the distance between a man and his former self. The judge's voice began again, calm, steady. For the record, she said, the court finds that the defendant's proposed conditions for release remain insufficient to mitigate the risks outlined in sealed testimonies and supplemental affidavits. Risk of flight, witness interference, and continued psychological coercion present a sustained threat. I looked up. His fingers were gripping his cheeks now. Red lines had bloomed across his skin from pressure. His eyes were closed, but not in denial, not in defiance, in collapse. She looked at him. Mr. Combs, she said, please rise. He didn't. The marshal on his right stepped forward, gently placing a hand on his shoulder. The other moved to the opposite side. No force, just expectation. He resisted, not violently, not stubbornly, but passively. His legs didn't move. His spine refused to straighten. Mr. Combs, the judge repeated, firmer now, please stand for the ruling. It took both marshals to get him up. They didn't yank. They just lifted under each arm until he swayed onto his feet like a man learning to walk again. He stared ahead, lips pressed into a hard line, eyes glistening. I drew that moment, not the tears, those came a second later. I drew the in-between, the expression that comes just before a dam breaks, the look of a man being told the sentence before the sentence. The judge's voice didn't change. "Bail is denied," she said. "The risk remains too great." And then he broke. It wasn't loud at first, just a tremble in the chest, shoulders shaking, a gasp that tried to hide itself in the rhythm of breath but failed. Then a sob, rah, ripped from somewhere too deep to be rehearsed. His knees buckled. The marshals caught him. He leaned forward, curling again, the way animals do when they've been wounded and no one's coming to help. His sobs weren't pretty. They were ragged, noisy, the kind of crying that has nothing to do with guilt or innocence and everything to do with realization that it's over, that no one's buying the show anymore, that there are no more doors to walk through. I filled 3 pages in those seconds. I drew the lines under his eyes deep, the sweat on his temple, the open mouth gasping for something that wouldn't come. I shaded the shadows behind him, not because they mattered legally, but because they mattered emotionally. Because a man like that doesn't cry in front of everyone unless he knows the shadows can't save him anymore. When the sobbing slowed, the judge waited. She didn't speak over him, didn't acknowledge it, just let the room absorb it. I looked around. The prosecution sat still, stone. The jury was gone, removed before this portion since it wasn't part of their process. But the clerk, the bailiff, the assistant prosecutor, each of them had a look I couldn't quite name. Not pity, not anger, just a kind of fatigue, like watching something long overdue finally collapse under its own weight. He whispered something then. No one heard it, but I saw it. His head was down, hands in his lap. He stared at the space just between his wrists and said something to no one at all. I didn't try to lip read. Didn't ask. Instead, I turned to a fresh sheet and started sketching the final image. Just his hands, folded, resting on something invisible. As I shaded the negative space between his fingers, I realized something that made me stop. There was a shape there. Not the shape of his hands, but the outline of a face. Eyes closed, mouth curved upward, soft, like he was imagining someone's head in his lap. But the space was empty. There was no one sitting near him. And yet, the way he leaned forward, the way he whispered down, the way he wept, it wasn't for the judge or the room. It was for there, behind the holding cell door. They told me I'd be handling the escort before I even finished my lunch. One of the new guys asked me if I was nervous, and I just gave him a look. Nervous? Nah. I've walked murderers down this hallway. I've held the elbows of gang leaders, white-collar wolves, even a guy who tried to chew off his own fingers to avoid a fingerprint match. They all got walked the same. Same cuffs, same door clicks, same dead-end path back to their cells. But today was different, I'll give them that. They handed me the paperwork and said, "You're taking Combs back." From 9C. I didn't need to ask which Combs. Everyone at MDC knows who he is. They don't say it out loud, but we've all seen the extra surveillance, the hush around certain logs, the way even the shift commanders speak quiet when his name comes up. We call his wing Echo Block. Not officially. On the books it's just D South. Medium security overflow, restructured for high-profile containment, but the nickname stuck months ago, long before I started pulling Combs' logs. They say you hear crying in there. Every night. Different voices. Echoes that aren't always his. I didn't believe it at first. Thought it was inmate myth. Same as the ones about the black mold that makes you hallucinate, or the guy who disappeared down the laundry chute. But after today, I'm not so sure. When they opened the holding cell at the courthouse, he didn't even look up. He just stood. No marshal had to prompt him, no threats, no dragging. He walked slow, head down, hands loose at his sides. Not in cuffs this time, too many cameras around, but he moved like he was shackled to something anyway. I walked half a step behind and one to the side, same as protocol. He didn't say a word during the entire trip, but I could tell something was off. He wasn't in the hallway. His body was here, but his eyes, they were somewhere else. Glass-eyed, not scanning, not present, like he was looking through the walls, past the floor, into something far away. It made the hairs on my arm rise up. We got to the transport van, drove the 20 minutes back to MDC in silence. The radio wasn't on. Even the driver kept glancing in the mirror, like he expected Combs to suddenly burst out with something. But he didn't. Back at intake, I signed him in like anyone else, logged the court return, timestamp, officer initials, condition of return. I checked the box that said cooperative, not because he was polite, just because he was empty. Escorting him back down the corridor to D South was surreal. You'd think the other inmates would bang on the glass, try to get his attention, throw words or threats or applause, but they didn't. Not this time. They just watched. One guy, Jackson from C-22, muttered something as we passed. I didn't catch it all. Just a phrase. He finally heard it. Inside the cell, Combs sat on the edge of the cot, like he was afraid the mattress might reject him. He didn't even glance at the books stacked neatly under the bunk or the tray of cold food they'd left earlier. He finally spoke. "You got music?" he asked, voice raspy like it hadn't been used in days. I told him no. He asked again, more specific this time. A CS old demo tape. The first one. The one I never released. I shook my head. Not here, man. He nodded. Once, like he already knew the answer before he asked. Then he sat back, not relaxed, just farther from the edge. His hands rested on his thighs. His fingers twitched now and then, like they wanted to drum something invisible. That's when he started whispering. Not to me, not even to himself, to the wall. "They know now," he said. "She told them everything." I didn't interrupt. There's a rule you learn fast in corrections. When someone's whispering to a wall, you let them. You log it later if you have to, but in the moment, you leave the ghosts alone. He whispered for 20 minutes. Same phrases over and over. She told them about the mirrors. They opened the red file. The basement wasn't supposed to be real. The priest said this would happen. That last one made me pause. We don't have a priest at MDC. Chaplain, sure, a rotation of them, but no priest, and definitely not one assigned to D South. It's not part of the protocol. Too sensitive, too risky. Everything that comes in or out of Echo Block is filtered 3 times. Religious personnel need special clearance. So when he said the priest warned me, I felt something cold move up the back of my neck. The rest of the day passed slow. I did my rounds, logged my cell checks, but part of my mind stayed in D South, circling that whisper like a drain. Later that night, I was doing my final walkthrough before shift change. I checked on Combs again, quietly. Through the observation panel, I saw him lying flat on the mattress, one arm slung over his eyes, the other hand clenched into a fist. Food tray untouched. Still whispering. I opened the sliding compartment on the door and gently tapped the bars with my pin. "Combs," I said. "You good?" No answer. Just a soft mumble. The roster had her name. They knew she wouldn't forget. I closed the slot and left him alone. I should have ended my shift right then, but something kept pulling at me. I went back once more. This time I glanced under the bunk, just to make sure nothing was stashed, nothing out of place. That's when I saw it. A torn piece of paper, folded twice, stuffed under the corner leg of the bed frame like it had been hidden in a rush. I pulled it out carefully. It wasn't a full sheet, just a ripped section of legal pad, the edges frayed like teeth marks. On it, scrawled in dark pen, 5 words. "The priest warned me." I stood there a second longer than I should have. Then I slipped it into my vest pocket, shut the door, and walked away. I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. Because I had the feeling I wasn't supposed to. Chapter 7. Whispers in the Prison Yard. They called me Smiley, but that ain't my real name. Got it in the county lockup back in 9 when some fool said I smile too much during shakedowns. I told him it's not that I'm happy, it's just I see everything. Once you see enough, it either makes you cry or laugh. I chose laugh. That's how I stay alive in here. I watch, I listen. I trade what I hear for what I need. 2 soups, half a honey bun, maybe a clean pair of socks from Laundry Ricky if he's feeling generous. People say prison's about muscle. They're wrong. It's about information. You can be 6'4" with fists like bricks, but if you don't know who snitched, who stole, or who's getting transferred next week, you're already dead. That's why they come to me. And that's why I started watching him. Diddy, Puff Daddy, P. Diddy, Brother Love, whatever name he's trying to live under now, none of that matters here. Out here, in MDC, he's just Unit D16, Pod 4, Echo Block Resident Number 6. And ever since the bail hearing, that man ain't right. He don't talk to nobody, don't eat nothing off his tray but maybe the banana, sits on the bench in the yard like a statue with breath. Sometimes he don't even blink for a whole minute. But here's the thing that got me real quiet. Last Thursday, we was out in the yard, gray morning, little bit of rain mist hanging in the air, which always makes the razor wire on the fence shine like it's wet with something else. Diddy was on the far side of the yard, right where the sun hits first through the concrete slit above the wall. I saw him talking to nobody. No, for real. He had his hands folded like he was doing a deal, palms up, nodding now and then. He mouthed names. Names I couldn't hear, but I know what mouths look like when they say Kim, Cassie, Dawn, and Sean. He wasn't looking around, just staring at the empty space across from him like someone was sitting there, like someone was answering. I nudged Twitch, this skinny white boy who sells knockoff cigarettes made from Bible paper and tea leaves, and I asked, "You see what I'm seeing?" Twitch didn't even look, just said he's been like that since the judge read the ghost pages. The ghost pages. So we call them in here. The sealed file, the mystery affidavit, the mirror notes, whatever the system wants to name them. Inside, they're known as the ghost pages, because whatever the judge read, it got inside Diddy's head and started pulling things out he couldn't put back in. Word started traveling fast after that hearing. Not through phones. Phones get locked. It's through notes, pass-downs, hustlers like me. I catch it all, piece it together like a puzzle with missing corners. There's talk about another civil case coming. Something darker, deeper, involving girls, young ones, minors. Talk is, someone finally gave up a name. Said they had tapes, logs, flight schedules. Said there were checks written to mothers who signed NDAs they didn't even read. And that ain't the kind of whisper you make up in here. That's the kind of whisper that gets you moved. Or gets you dead. I wrote it down. In my book. Yeah, I keep a book. Spiral notebook with a blue cover. Says composition on the front. No one touches it. No one even asks. They know better. I write it all down. Who said what? Who's scared? Who stopped talking after rec time last week? They think I'm gonna write a memoir. I told them Netflix already gave me a handshake deal. That's a lie, of course. But it makes them nervous enough to keep talking. I got 3 whole pages on Diddy's new habits. Page 44, Diddy requested the window blind stay closed during lights on hours. Page 45, Diddy don't take showers unless the light above the soap dispenser is off. He says it reflects things that ain't real. Page 46, Diddy woke up screaming at 2:17 a.m. 3 nights ago. Screamed the judge's name. Not her last name, her first name. Nobody told him that name. Now, how he knew her first name, that's what got the yard talking. Ain't even on the documents they give inmates. Someone had to tell him. Or maybe he heard it another way. There's a story I don't tell. It happened 2 days after the crying fit. Diddy was in the yard again, this time not talking, just sitting, elbows on his knees, face in his hands. I passed by, like I always do, pretending not to stare. I'm good at blending in. But I looked just long enough to notice something new. He wasn't crying. He was humming. Quiet, low, off-key, the same 8 notes over and over. I asked around, played the rhythm on a table with my knuckles. Tiny Joe from C8 recognized it, said it was the opening melody from a leaked demo back in 9.A, a song Cassie wrote before she disappeared from the radio. It was never released, but Diddy had a copy. He kept it on a drive locked in a safe. Joe said he knew a guy who tried to leak it once. That guy went missing for a week, came back with a busted jaw and no memory of what happened. Now, here's the part I really don't say to anyone else. That night, after lights out, I passed Echo Block again on my sanitation shift. I wasn't supposed to stop, wasn't supposed to look. But I saw something. Through the narrow window in Diddy's cell, I saw him curled on the floor, head against the wall. His hands were moving like he was drawing shapes on the concrete, circles, overlapping, slow, careful. Then he stopped, sat up, looked right at the window, and smiled. Not at me, at someone else. Someone who wasn't there. He mouthed one word. Ready. Now maybe he was talking to himself. Maybe it was just the pressure, the silence, the slow, drowning feeling that prison puts in your bones. But I've seen men fall apart. I've seen them snap, cry, fight, beg, rot. I know the signs of guilt. I know the posture of a man who regrets. And I'm telling you straight, that ain't what this is. Diddy didn't cry because of what the judge said. He cried because of what the judge didn't say. And whatever's coming next, he's ready for it. Chapter 8. The Last Transcript. The courthouse after hours feels like a place time forgot. It hums, low and cold, like the whole building's exhaling. You hear things in that kind of silence. The creak of a drawer no one opened. The elevator settling even when no one's in it. The soft buzz of lights that never turn off. It's not haunting exactly, but it's close. That's when I get my best work done. Alone. No phones ringing, no lawyers arguing over file numbers, no one breathing over my shoulder. I was just about to finish the last archive entry from courtroom 9C when something stopped me. It was a file I hadn't seen before. Now, I know what's supposed to be in each case bundle. I cross-section everything, seals, indexes, timestamps, memo flags. This one didn't match. It had the right case number, but there was a strange suffix, one I didn't recognize. It was labeled ex parte comms, judge only. It shouldn't have been in my batch at all. I hovered over it for a second. Most people would have skipped it. But I've been in this building too long to pretend I don't get curious when the system gets sloppy. I clicked. It opened up a transcript. No case log, no clerk notation, just plain black text and a header in gray that said, sealed sidebar, entry 7, for judicial discretion only. What came next wasn't meant for anyone else. It wasn't read aloud in court. It wasn't part of the public record. This was a private conversation, tucked into the shadows of procedure. Just 2 speakers, J for the judge and P1, someone from the prosecution. And here's what I read. The judge started. She asked, "Before we proceed with the hearing, I need clarity on the witness situation." And the prosecutor answered, "You'll have it. One is already relocated. We're following protocol." The judge pushed a little more. "You're certain they've agreed to testify?" And the reply came quick. "Yes. They've signed the intent. They're under federal protection as of last Friday. Facility undisclosed, even to us." Then the judge asked the question that hit me square in the chest. How close were they to the defendant? And the answer? Inner circle, 20 years, private access, involved in logistics, cleanup, party coordination, had knowledge of the basement, the signature system, and the secondary phones. There was a space after that, not a line, just space, like the document itself had paused. Then came the next question. Are they naming others? And the answer, yes, at least 3. The judge pressed again. And the materials? And the prosecutor laid it out clean. 2 external hard drives, 8 logbooks, partial voice recordings, 1 tape. Then the judge asked the final question. The defendant doesn't know? And the last line just said, "Suspected, but he never knew who." That's when I stopped reading. I leaned back in my chair, hands still on the keyboard, heart pounding like I'd just been chased. And in that moment, everything made sense. The crying in the courtroom, the way his body folded in on itself, like it had been hollowed out from the inside. He wasn't reacting to what the judge read, not just that. He was reacting to what she didn't say out loud. He recognized the silence. He figured it out. Someone close to him had flipped. Not just anyone, not some old employee, not a distant accuser. No, this was someone from inside, from the inner ring, someone who had seen it all and finally broke. Or maybe they'd been planning it for a long time. Maybe it wasn't a betrayal. Maybe it was the escape. And now, they were under protection, waiting, preparing to step into that witness box and say what none of us could imagine. With evidence, with names, with the kind of details that couldn't be denied or discredited. My eyes stung. I didn't blink. I just kept staring at the screen, reading that final sentence over and over. He suspected, but he never knew who. I thought about leaking it, just for a second. 1 screenshot, 1 email. I knew people who'd pay just to see it. Media, advocacy groups, even people inside the system who just wanted to be the first to break it open. But I didn't, because I knew better. Because some truths don't belong to the first person who finds them. I closed the file, logged the entry, archived it under sealed, internal use only. My clearance was enough to see it, but not enough to say a word. I sat in that cold little archive room and stared up at the black dome in the corner. Security camera, been there forever. Most days I forget it exists. But that night, the red light on it was blinking steady. Someone was watching. I don't know who. I didn't ask. I didn't look into it. I just powered down the terminal, stood up slow, and left the file exactly where it belonged, buried. And as I walked out, past the locked evidence cages and sealed vault drawers, I kept thinking about him. About Diddy, about the way he broke in front of everyone. He wasn't crying for what was revealed. He was crying because the worst part hadn't even come out yet.